What if the first light you ever knew still flickers inside you? What if death is a corridor, not a wall? What if an egg, older than the stars, cracked, and your soul remembers the sound? What if wine once meant awakening, not forgetfulness? What if the gods taught a secret? That memory is the rope thrown across the abyss. There is one thread we will follow through every chamber of this story. The soul is a divine spark fallen among titans, seeking remembrance to return to the light. You must understand, Orphism is not mere ornament in the Greek world. It is a whisper that claims the body is a veil, and the true self is older than Olympus. Scholars call it a mystery religion. Initiates called it a path. Between history and him, it stands, half doctrine, half revelation. Throughout history, that thread of memory tightens, quietly drawing mortals toward first light. Begin with the name that sings, Orpheus, musician, descent worker, voice that charmed stone. The official epics scarcely fix him, yet the philosophical dialogues remember him as inventor and enchanter, a figure whose song opens thresholds. Whether he lived matters less than what his name gathered, rites, verses, and promises that the soul is not extinguished by death. What many don't see is how this differs from civic cult. Less sacrifice for favor, more purification for transformation. In Orphism, the sacred text is itself a rite, the poem, a ladder. From these verses grows a discipline that faces the afterlife with instructions instead of fear. You must understand the wager. If the soul is divine, it does not end. It migrates. The Greeks had a word for it, metempsychosis, the passage of the soul through bodies, a doctrine braided with Pythagoras and echoed in Plato's pages. Orphic teaching turns this from fate to task. The wheel is grievous, but it can be escaped. Memory and purity are the keys. Throughout history, this notion traveled far, colored by philosophers and reformers, yet Orphism roots it in ritual and vow, promising release from the cycle into kinship with the gods. What many don't see, reincarnation here, is not drift, but discipline. Consider the tablets, thin gold leaves folded near the tongue of the dead, instructions scratched like secret cartography. I am a child of earth and starry sky, they say. Give me to drink from the pool of memory. These lamellae are not metaphors buried for beauty. They are maps, passwords, and vows, guiding and initiate through judges and rivers toward Persephone's favor. Throughout history, their fragments surface like sparks of the same fire, testifying that remembrance defeats forgetting. The tablets are Orphism made portable, theology condensed to itinerary, poetry transmuted into passage. What many don't see is how tangible their hope became. Now listen to the first dawn in their cosmogony. Before the chorus of gods, time coils with necessity. From their pressure, a luminous egg forms and breaks, and the firstborn appears, Phanes, the one who brings to light. Golden-winged, serpent-wreathed, the flame of manifestation itself. In his emergence, heaven and earth separate. Desire and intelligence take shape. The world remembers how to be. You must understand. This is not Homer's cosmos. It is more inward, more esoteric, a metaphysics sung as myth. Throughout history, commentators felt Near Eastern winds in it. Yet its poetry remained unmistakably Greek in radiance. From Phanes, the scepter passes, night, then Uranos, then Kronos, then Zeus, until the order of gods mirrors the order of consciousness, from pure appearing to star-studded silence, to vault and time, to mind that gathers all powers. Some verses say Zeus swallows Phanes, containing every potency in himself before distributing them as the known pantheon. What many don't see is the philosophical claim hidden here. Unity precedes multiplicity and remains within it. The egg does not vanish when it cracks. Its curve lives in every contour. Throughout history, Orphic theogony insists that creation is conservation of light. But Orphism is more than a birth story. It is also a wound. Hera sets the Titans upon the child Dionysus. He is dismembered, devoured, except the heart, saved, reborn. From the ash of punished Titans and the divine remnant comes humanity. Body from the violent, soul from the god. You must understand the doctrine that follows. We are mixed, capable of ecstasy and rage, clarity and frenzy. Throughout history, this myth explains our doubleness and our task. To purify the Dionysian spark, to recall the heart that survived. What many don't see is how grief itself becomes instruction here, teaching reunion through remembrance. Hence the rites, not spectacle, but medicine, purifications, dietary rules, hymns that tune the inner instrument, and at the center, a sacrament of wine that once meant more than appetite. To drink could mean to awaken the god within, to cross the narrow bridge between fear and fearlessness, to taste the courage that walks into Hades and returns with love intact. Throughout history, this enthusiasm, literally God within, was judged by excess or defended as ecstasy. You must understand the balance. True intoxication unveils, false intoxication blinds. The right aimed at the first. The world, then as now, often chose the second. Around this flame stands philosophy. Pythagoras reforms Orphic currents into a way of life, counting not only numbers, but breaths, days, and deeds. Plato refracts them into argument and allegory, asking whether living is itself a kind of death, and learning a recollection. Throughout history, the borders blur. Is this Orphic inside Platonism, or Platonizing of Orphism? You must understand, the traffic is two-way. Ritual becomes idea, idea returns as rite. What many don't see is how these exchanges made later religions possible, translating sacrament into symbol, symbol back into sacrament, like a lyre tuned and retuned. So the doctrine gathers, the soul forgets, the world dazzles, the wheel turns. Against this, Orphism offers a simple, terrible remedy. Remember your origin in light. Remember the password of stars. Remember that the body is a mask, not a jailer, if you learn its art. Throughout history, initiates rehearsed memory like soldiers drill courage, so that at the last threshold they would not drink lethe, but Mnemosyne. You must understand, remembrance here is not nostalgia, it is navigation, and the egg's crack is still audible, if you stand very still. Now we step toward the labyrinth's first turn. What if every circle is a whisper of eternity? What if the serpent coiled around the egg was not a threat, but the first prayer? What if creation itself is not an explosion, but a remembering? What if the gods never died, only changed their symbols? What if your heartbeat is the echo of that first crack in the shell of time? In the beginning, before language, before Zeus, before the hymn, there was hydros, water, dark and breathing. From it rose Gaia, mud made conscious, the first earth. The Greeks said this, but so did Egypt with its Nun and Sumer with its Abzu. Every culture remembers that creation came wet. What many don't see is how these waters are not mere matter. They are memory, the unformed mind of existence. You must understand, the Orphic cosmogony begins not with explosion, but immersion. The world dreamed itself awake through water. Within this fluid vastness formed the first vessel, a silver egg, the Orphic Egg. It floated, timeless, until cracked by Kronos, the serpent of time. Its halves became heaven and earth, upper and lower, thought and form. Phanes, the Shining One, emerged, winged and luminous, bearing all gods within. In him, every potential coexisted. What many don't see is how this is less myth than metaphysics. The egg is being, the serpent is duration, the crack is consciousness. Throughout history, this vision reappears in India's golden egg, in Finland's world egg, in Polynesia's shell of light. The Greeks remembered through Orpheus what humanity everywhere intuited, that we are born from a vessel of opposites. The serpent that winds about the egg is no enemy. It is the Milky Way, the axis of time, the Ouroboros eating itself into eternity. To the Orphic mind, it represents necessity, the force that binds potential into shape. You must understand, without this binding, light would scatter into nothingness. The snake is the first law, the curve that keeps chaos in orbit. What many don't see is that Orphic art portrays it as both guardian and danger. The power that encircles creation also suffocates it. This tension between containment and liberation is the very heart of Orphic philosophy. Phanes, the god born of the egg, is both male and female, unity before division. Hermaphroditic, radiant, he is desire and reason entwined. His name means to bring to light, and in him shines the first awareness that existence recognizes itself. From his mind comes night, from night Uranos, from Uranos Kronos, from Kronos Zeus, the succession of divine consciousness, narrowing into individuality. You must understand, this is not genealogy, but geometry, concentric emanations of awareness condensing into cosmos. Throughout history, thinkers from Pythagoras to Plotinus saw in this myth the architecture of thought itself, a ladder descending from unity into multitude. When Zeus swallows Phanes, as the hymns claim, it is not cannibalism, but consummation. The one returns into the all. Every possibility, every world, every atom becomes latent again in his being. All potentiations, the text says, are within Zeus. This is the Orphic paradox. Creation is not an event, but a pulse, expansion, contraction, remembrance. What many don't see is how this cycle mirrors breath, heartbeat, incarnation. The universe is the God inhaling and exhaling itself into form. In that rhythm, everything that has been will be again, until awareness fulfills its own reflection. The philosophers inherited this vision. Pythagoras reformulated it into numbers, Plato into allegory. When Plato speaks in the Gorgias, who knows whether life is death and death life? He echoes Orpheus. The body, soma, he says, is a tomb. Yet within this prison glows a divine ember, a particle of the ether itself. To live is to forget. To die is to remember. You must understand, this is not pessimism, but map-making. The Orphic tablets found beside the dead are coordinates for awakening. I am a child of earth and starry sky. They are passports home, reminding the soul of its origin and task. To escape the grievous wheel of return. The grievous wheel, metempsychosis, turns endlessly, binding souls to flesh through appetite and ignorance. Orphic purification sought to stop its spin. Through diet, discipline, and sacred song, wine became sacrament again, not for forgetting, but for remembering. The initiate's intoxication mirrored Dionysus's dismemberment, ecstasy as reassembly, joy as resurrection. Throughout history, what many don't see is how this reverence for wine survived beneath other names, Eucharist, elixir, communion, each a shadow of the same original vow to taste the God within. When the initiate gazed upon the Orphic egg wrapped in a serpent, he was not observing myth. He was confronting himself. The egg was his soul. The serpent, his time-bound life. To pierce the shell was to awaken, to remember the Phanes light that sleeps behind the eyes. You must understand, the mystery here is not external, it unfolds inward, a cosmogony repeated in every consciousness. Throughout history, mystics called it the second birth, philosophers the awakening of Nous, poets the breaking of dawn. Each phrase means the same thing. The egg opens again. So Orphism teaches, the world is not to be escaped but reread. Every serpent hides wisdom. Every egg shelters dawn. Between matter and spirit there is no war, only a misunderstanding. What many don't see is that the divine spark in man is not fallen but veiled. When we see through the veil, time itself becomes translucent. The serpent loosens. The egg cracks again. Phanes shine through us. The song of Orpheus is that sound, the resonance between mortality and the eternal note that never dies. And as the lyre fades, we hear the next turn approaching. Time winds once more, deeper into the labyrinth, where dismemberment and divinity meet in the body of Dionysus. What if the divine must shatter to be known? What if ecstasy is the memory of something once whole? What if the gods bleed so that mortals may remember eternity? What if every sorrow is a fragment of the Sacred Heart? What if resurrection was never about a tomb, but about the pieces within us, learning to sing again? At the center of Orphism burns a grief disguised as revelation, the death of Dionysus. The myth tells that Zeus's son, Zagreus, radiant child of the divine, was torn apart by the Titans at Hera's command. They devoured him, leaving only the heart intact, which Athena carried back to Zeus. From that heart came rebirth. From the ashes of the Titans came humanity. You must understand the implication. We are made of two essences, divine and defiant. The same mixture that once tore the god apart now lives within us, yearning for reunion. This myth is not merely a story of cruelty, but of constitution. It explains why man is capable of both holiness and horror. The Titan's crime is our inheritance, Dionysus's heart, our hope. To the Orphic mind, life itself is this tension, the luminous soul imprisoned in the clay of rebellion. What many don't see is that the myth mirrors our inner warfare, reason against passion, purity against impulse. Yet Orphism does not preach hatred of the flesh. It preaches remembrance of its divine origin. The task is not to escape the body, but to purify it, until the God within can see through its eyes again. When initiates sang the hymns of Dionysus, they were not praising intoxication, but transformation. His wine was not for forgetfulness, but awakening, a sacred madness, the divine frenzy that strips away masks. To drink was to invite the god back into the veins, to remember the ecstasy of unity. In this light, Dionysus is not the god of chaos, he is the god who restores the lost connection between heaven and heartbeat. Each drop of wine is an ember of the first fire, each song is the echo of that dismembered cry. You must understand, in Orphism, death and birth are never opposites. Dionysus dies to prove the immortality of his essence. The heart survives, because consciousness cannot perish. It only changes form. This belief threads through Greek thought, like hidden lightning. Pythagoras heard it, Plato reasoned it, the mysteries dramatized it. To live is to carry the memory of the god's wound. To die is to awaken into his wholeness. Humanity's suffering becomes the myth, enacted again and again, until the pieces remember the melody that binds them. Orphic initiations were therefore not public spectacles, but sacred rehearsals of resurrection. The candidate would face symbolic death, descent, purification, and rebirth. Mirroring Dionysus's journey, each step demanded courage, discipline, and silence. The aim was simple and infinite, to dissolve the Titan in oneself and release the divine. This is why Orphic life was ascetic, not from fear of pleasure, but from reverence for clarity. To live as an initiate was to keep the soul lucid amidst the fog of desire, so that, when the final threshold arrived, recognition would triumph over oblivion. The hymn to Dionysus calls him twice-born, liberator, he who breaks the bonds. In him, the Orphics found the eternal cycle made flesh, the god who descends into matter to lift matter into spirit. Every ritual act was an echo of this cosmic rhythm. When the initiate poured the libation, it was not an offering to an absent deity. It was participation in the god's own heartbeat. To pour wine was to pour remembrance, to taste eternity, hidden in the mortal cup. And yet, the myth goes deeper still. Some traditions say that the moment the Titans looked upon the shining child, they were blinded by envy. Their reflection in his light revealed what they lacked. So they destroyed him, thinking they could possess what could only be mirrored. In that act, they birthed the human condition, our constant hunger for the divine we already contain. You must understand, envy of the light is the tragedy of consciousness. We chase what we are. The Orphic way teaches instead to turn inward, polish the mirror, and let the buried god look back. Throughout centuries, artists and mystics reinterpreted this tale, the dying and resurrected god recurring under countless names. Osiris, Tammuz, Christ, Dionysus all speak the same mystery, divinity shattered to redeem memory. The difference is not in doctrine, but in direction. Orphism turns the gaze inward. Salvation is not bestowed, but remembered. The heart of Dionysus beats within every seeker. Its pulse is the drum of awakening. So the dismembered god does not die. He disperses into trees, rivers, and flesh, into laughter and tears, into the thousand masks of being. To know him is to gather these fragments back into song. The Orphic hymn is a reconstruction of the divine body through sound, a weaving of chaos into harmony. What many don't see is that the music of Orpheus is not about control. It is about remembrance. Every note reclaims a piece of the god. Every echo reassembles the cosmos. As the last echoes fade, the voice of Orpheus reminds us, even in ruin, there is rhythm. Even in dismemberment, there is design. The heart still beats beneath the ashes, waiting to rise again. What if the soul is not learning but remembering? What if every lifetime is a rehearsal for awakening? What if the stars above are not distant, but reflections of what burns inside you? What if heaven is not a place to go, but a state to recall? What if the true journey home is not upward, but inward? In the wake of Dionysus's rebirth, Orphism turned its gaze to the afterlife, the hidden geography beyond death. To its initiates, existence was a pilgrimage across lifetimes, a cycle known as the grievous wheel. The soul, divine by birth yet exiled by ignorance, wanders body to body, realm to realm, until it remembers its origin. You must understand, this is not punishment, but pedagogy. The universe teaches by repetition. Each birth is a lesson rehearsed, each death an exam of memory. Forgetfulness, not sin, is the great exile. Remembering, not faith, is the great salvation. The Orphic tablets, those delicate gold leaves buried beside the dead, are whispers from that remembrance. They bear inscriptions like passwords for eternity. I am a child of earth and starry sky, but my race is of heaven alone. To the uninitiated, they are mere poetry. To the awakened, they are coordinates, a map of liberation. The soul, guided by these verses, must avoid the pool of Lethe, the water of forgetting, and seek instead the spring of Mnemosyne, the water of memory. What many don't see is how this myth translates into psychology. Life itself is a constant choice between amnesia and awareness, between illusion and When the initiate reached the spring of Mnemosyne, they would not drink mindlessly. They would recite their lineage, affirm their divine spark, and by doing so, dissolve the illusion of separation. This ritual was the ultimate act of self-recognition. In Orphism, knowledge of origin is power of return. You must understand, to remember where you come from is to break the cycle of wandering. The tablets are not charms. They are mirrors. They do not command the gods. They remind the soul of its own forgotten recollection. The Orphics called their path catharsis, purification. It was not mere ritual cleansing, but an interior refinement, a stripping away of all that obscures the divine within. Through fasting, contemplation, music, and moral discipline, the initiate prepared to meet death as an equal, not a victim. The purified soul, they believed, would ascend through luminous realms, eventually rejoining the divine source from which it fell. What many don't see is how this teaching prefigures philosophies yet to come. Buddhism's release from samsara, Christianity's resurrection, Hermetic ascent through the spheres, all are variations of the same golden path. The return to origin through remembrance. Orphic purification was not a denial of the world, but a transformation of perception. To live purely was to see clearly, to perceive divinity in all things, even in decay. The initiate learned to listen for harmony within noise, to find pattern in chaos. They became philosophers not by speculation, but by attunement. Through music, through silence, through the measured rhythm of life itself, they sought to retune the soul's instrument to the cosmic lyre. What many don't see is that purity in Orphism was not moral perfection, but resonance, the alignment of the human tone with the universal chord. And so the Orphic way demanded awareness in every act, what one ate, what one spoke, what one dreamed. The soul, they said, digests deeds as the body digests food. Impurity is heaviness. Remembrance is lightness. The lighter the soul, the higher it rises after death. You must understand, this is not metaphor. It is metaphysics rendered through rhythm. Every thought either lifts or anchors. Every moment is a choice between ascent and return. The wise live as if already among the stars. To those who mocked their austerity, the Orphics offered no defense. Their silence was their sermon. In a world of ritual spectacle, they pursued inward ceremony. To them, temples were temporary. Consciousness was eternal. They sang their hymns not to beg favor, but to awaken frequency. Each note was an offering of alignment, a sound designed to recall the harmony of creation itself. What many don't see is that the Orphic hymn was less prayer than physics. The act of sound transforming matter, the soul vibrating toward its original pitch. Through centuries, these ideas fermented quietly, blending with Pythagorean discipline and Platonic vision. Together they formed a lineage of sacred philosophy that survived even when temples fell. Orphism became the ghost in Greek religion, the hidden current in philosophy, the whisper behind mystery schools. It was the conviction that beneath every form of life there is a music playing, a melody of return. To hear it is to awaken. To follow it is to be free. In this cosmic symphony, death was no longer feared. The initiate, standing before the final threshold, would speak not of dread, but of recognition, for they had already died in spirit many times before. They knew that the body was a garment, the grave a door, and beyond it, the familiar voice of Phanes calling them home. The light they once sought in myth now glowed within their chest. They did not rise toward heaven. They unfolded into it. So ends the passage of purification, the first ascent of the remembered soul. But the journey is not finished. Beyond remembrance lies union. Beyond purity, revelation. The next part opens the gates of philosophy itself, where Orphism merges with reason, and divine memory becomes the foundation of thought. What if philosophy began not with curiosity, but with longing? What if every question hides an ancient homesickness? What if truth is not discovered, but remembered? What if wisdom itself is a form of divine nostalgia? What if all philosophy is Orpheus still trying to sing his way back to the light? When the last of the Orphic hymns faded into echo, their essence did not vanish, it transmuted. The temples crumbled, but the song slipped into language. Philosophy was born from ritual. The first philosophers were heirs of the mysteries, carrying the same questions in new tongues. They exchanged lyres for logic. But the heartbeat was the same, the yearning to reconcile the mortal and the eternal. You must understand, Greece's thinkers were not inventing truth. They were translating it. Orphism's flame became the lamp of philosophy, its chants reborn as syllogisms, its ecstasies refined into ideas. Pythagoras, the first great bridge between mystic and mathematician, stood at the crossroads of this transformation. His numbers were not abstractions, they were hymns given geometric form. To him, the cosmos sang, and the intervals between stars formed harmony. The Orphic Egg became his perfect sphere, Phanes his one, unfolding into the many. He taught that the soul, being harmonic, must live in tune with the world's rhythm. What many don't see is that his silence was sacred not from secrecy, but from reverence. Sound could both reveal and disrupt the divine chord. Each equation was a prayer, each theorem a psalm of memory. From Pythagoras's geometry arose Plato's metaphysics. In the dim corridors of his academy, the echoes of Orphic teaching still lingered. The immortal soul, the realm of pure forms, the ascent through recollection. These were philosophical masks for the same Orphic truths. All learning, he said, is remembering. You must understand how radical that statement is. Knowledge is not acquisition, but awakening. The philosopher's task is not to discover what is new, but to recall what has always been. Thus, the philosopher becomes an initiate, his dialectic a ritual, his argument a hymn. In the Phaedo, Plato describes death as liberation, echoing the gold tablet's voice. We are in a state of death, and the body is our tomb. This was no morbid reflection, but a call to consciousness. The soul, imprisoned in sensation, must polish the mirror of mind until it reflects the eternal light again, through reasoning, contemplation, and love of truth. One retraces the steps of Orphic purification, ascending from shadow to form, from noise to harmony. What many don't see is that Plato's philosophy is Orphism reborn in daylight, myth turned method, mystery made rational. And beyond Plato, the current continued. Plotinus would later call the divine the One, an ineffable source from which all being flows and to which all being returns. His mystic ascent through contemplation is the philosopher's version of the initiate's journey through Mnemosyne's spring. The One is Phanes without name, shining beyond comprehension. In this lineage, philosophy becomes theology stripped of dogma, an inward pilgrimage conducted in thought instead of temple. You must understand, these thinkers were not merely analyzing the world, they were remembering the world's first thought. Even the Stoics, pragmatic heirs of Athens, carried Orphic embers in their calm hearts. Their belief in the Logos, the rational fire that orders all things, was the serpent encircling the egg once more. Logic, as cosmic necessity to live according to nature, was to remember the divine pattern within the chaos of circumstance. In every breath of their discipline lay the same vow, to harmonize the self with the eternal rhythm. Philosophy, for them, was not theory but therapy, the art of aligning soul with cosmos. Throughout these evolutions, one truth remained unbroken. The philosopher and the mystic are siblings, both seek the real beneath the visible. Both use different tools, one the word, the other the silence, but both listen for the same hidden chord. What many don't see is that Greece's golden age of thought was not a rejection of religion, but its transfiguration. The Orphic mystery became inquiry, initiation became reason. Yet beneath every argument lies awe, and beneath every syllogism, song. As the centuries turned, Orphic wisdom became the ghost in the architecture of Western thought. The idea of the immortal soul survived every empire. The concept of divine unity whispered through the corridors of Neoplatonism, alchemy, and Christian mysticism. Even as the language changed, the melody remained. To know is to remember. To live well is to harmonize. To die awake is to return. You must understand, Orphism is not a religion lost. It is a rhythm that never ceased. So when the philosopher gazes at the heavens, measuring motion with reason, he is still tracing the serpent's coil. When he defines beauty, he is naming Phanes. When he speaks of virtue, he is decoding the hymn of Dionysus's heart. The academy, the monastery, and the observatory all descend from the same cave where Orpheus sang. The sound of the lyre has only changed instruments, and thus the cycle turns again. Knowledge becomes devotion, and devotion becomes knowledge. The philosopher's quest and the mystic's initiation converge at the same luminous door, the realization that mind and cosmos are mirrors. Beyond that threshold lies not thought, but presence. The same light that once broke the Orphic egg still shines there, unbroken, waiting to be seen. What if every ritual was a language the gods once spoke? What if silence was the truest form of prayer? What if the sacred was never lost, only hidden in plain sight? What if initiation was not about joining, but remembering? What if the light we chase is the one already burning behind our eyes? Beneath the philosophy, beneath the hymns, Orphism kept a secret body, a ritual anatomy. Its wisdom was not confined to thought, but enacted through sacred practice, whispered from mouth to ear. These were the mysteria, the unseen ceremonies said to open the gates between mortal and divine. You must understand, these rites were never spectacle, they were transformation. To witness them was to die symbolically, to shed illusion, to awaken memory. Their secrecy was not elitism, it was protection. Truth, unprepared, can blind. The initiations unfolded like a cosmic play. Descent, purification, revelation, ascent. Each phase mirrored the soul's eternal pattern, reenacting the myth of Dionysus and the journey through death into remembrance. The first act was catharsis, cleansing. The initiate fasted, abstained, withdrew from noise. The body was purified to mirror the clarity of the soul it sought to unveil. What many don't see is that this was not rejection of the world, but preparation to perceive it truly. To cleanse was to clear the mirror of perception, so that divine reflection could return. Then came the sacred silence. The Orphics revered quiet as the womb of wisdom. No word was spoken that did not serve remembrance. Silence, they said, is the music of the unseen. Phanes still unspoken, Dionysus still unborn. In darkness, initiates were blindfolded, symbolizing the soul's ignorance before awakening. You must understand, this was not punishment, but ritual blindness, the humbling of the intellect before mystery. Only by closing the outer eyes could the inner vision ignite. At the heart of the ceremony was Talit, the divine completion. Here the initiate beheld sacred symbols, perhaps the egg and serpent, perhaps a mirror, perhaps the mask of Dionysus himself. The priest would whisper fragments of hymns, each syllable carrying centuries of coded meaning. These objects were not idols, but living metaphors, keys to memory. To gaze upon them was to recall one's divine ancestry, to feel the pulse of Phanes in one's veins. The moment of recognition, the flash of knowing, I am that light, was the true initiation. Wine played its part again, not as intoxication, but as invocation. It was both offering and mirror. The crimson reflection of divine essence to drink was to share in the god's heart, to taste the memory of the first creation. The cup, round and glimmering, was a miniature of the cosmic egg, the serpent of vapor rising from it. The breath of Phanes through this act, the initiate united heaven and flesh, symbol and soul. What many don't see is that this ritual of wine prefigured sacraments across ages, the communion of the eternal with the mortal through remembrance. The Orphic rites were layered with symbols, each a doorway. The serpent coiled 3 times around the egg, body, mind, and spirit. The mirror represented the divine reflection, trapped in matter. The torch, flame of Phanes, stood for awareness-piercing darkness. Even the lyre had meaning. Its strings, they said, were the 7 tones of creation, vibrating through existence. To play them in harmony was to realign with the cosmos itself. Every gesture, every note was a fragment of the original song of being. To outsiders, the initiates appeared austere, even strange. They avoided violence, practiced vegetarianism, and lived with quiet discipline. Yet these rules were not moral prescriptions, they were metaphysical preparations. To kill, to consume flesh, was to bind oneself to the cycle of death. To live gently was to lighten the soul's ascent. You must understand. The Orphic way was a philosophy of resonance. Everything one did vibrated through the unseen. Each act of kindness, each word of truth, was a chord played on the lyre of eternity. Within the secret chambers of initiation, death was dramatized. The initiate lay in darkness, as hymns recited the journey through Hades. They met Persephone not as queen of shadows, but as guardian of rebirth. The gold tablets told them what to say. I have flown out of the sorrowful, weary circle. I have entered with swift feet into the bosom of the goddess. And when the blindfold was removed, they saw light, not from the sun, but from within. The rite's power was in recognition, the revelation that the underworld is not beneath us, but within us, and that ascent begins the moment we awaken afterward. The initiate was called Bacchus, twice born. Their laughter was different, their silence deeper. They no longer feared death, for they had already died once in the ceremony. The Orphic promise was fulfilled not through dogma, but through experience, immortality proven in consciousness. What many don't see is that the greatest miracle of Orphism was psychological. It transformed perception into eternity. To know that you are a child of starry sky is to live as one. The rites were passed from generation to generation, sometimes merging, sometimes hidden in new robes, in the Eleusinian mysteries, in Hermetic philosophy, in Gnostic vision. Yet the pattern remained unchanged. Descent, purification, remembrance, ascent. To enter the Orphic path was to align with the cosmic rhythm of death and resurrection, to practice being eternal, and so the mysteries survived, not in temples, but in hearts. every dream of awakening, every prayer for reunion, every artist seeking the divine pattern. These are modern initiates of the same flame. The rites never ended. They transformed into the language of symbols that still guide us today. The rites of Orphism did not vanish. They flowed underground. As temples fell and new faiths rose, their currents seeped into the soil of civilizations. You must understand, mysteries never end. They change their masks. By the time the world turned from myth to creed, Orphic fire was already hidden in the heart of many faiths, its symbols reborn, its philosophy recast as revelation, the serpent, the egg, the wine, the god who dies and rises again. These became universal archetypes, carried across tongues, clothed in new scriptures. From the Orphic hymns came the whispers that shaped Gnostic thought. The Gnostics spoke of divine sparks trapped in flesh, longing for the pleroma, the fullness of light. They taught that salvation comes through gnosis, secret knowledge of origin. You must understand, this is the same melody played on a different instrument. The Orphic soul sought Mnemosyne's spring. The Gnostic soul sought remembrance of the true God beyond the demiurge. Both saw matter as a veil, and memory as liberation. Both believed that the divine could be known not through faith, but through awakening. Pythagorean echoes guided them too. Numbers became sacred geometry, creation rendered as vibration. In Alexandria, where Greek philosophy met Hebrew mysticism and Egyptian theurgy, these traditions mingled, birthing the Hermetic texts. There again, we hear Orpheus's chord, as above, so below. The universe as living harmony, the soul as its reflection. The Hermetists spoke of ascent through the spheres, of purification through knowledge, of the unity of all being, a continuation of the Orphic ascent retold for a new age. And then into this current, the story of Christ was spoken. A divine Son, born of heaven, descends into matter, dies, and rises again to reunite humanity with the Father. The bread and wine become his body and blood, the same symbols of divine remembrance used in Orphic ritual. The wine that once awakened Dionysus within now became the blood of God, the elixir of eternal life. What many don't see is that this was not imitation, but evolution. The river of Orphism joining a new sea, the dying and rising God, the sacred meal, the promise of immortality through union, all reappeared in Christian form, but Christianity, in its infancy, still shimmered with mystery. The early Gnostic Christians like Valentinus and Basilides spoke of a secret teaching given to the few, of divine knowledge as redemption. They echoed the initiatory path, purification, illumination, perfection. To them, Christ was not only Savior, but revealer, a Phanes in human guise, showing the way through the dark labyrinth of matter back to the Father of Light. You must understand, their gospel was less about belief and more about remembrance. Faith was the first step. Knowledge was the return. The Orthodox world, however, feared what could not be contained. The mystery was pushed beneath the altar, hidden beneath the weight of law and dogma. Yet symbols do not die. The cross replaced the Orphic egg. The serpent became temptation instead of wisdom. But the pattern endured: the Eucharist, the baptism, the resurrection. All are fragments of the same cosmic memory. The Church preserved in ritual what the mysteries once taught. In silence the soul still drinks, still remembers, still returns. In parallel, other currents flowed. Neoplatonism rose like the phoenix of Orpheus's philosophy. Plotinus and later Iamblichus spoke again of ascent, of contemplation as divine union. Theurgy, ritual that invokes the gods, became philosophy in action, a marriage of reason and mystery. Here the Orphic hymns were sung anew, now in the language of metaphysics. They taught that the One, ineffable and infinite, descends into many forms, and that the soul's task is to rise through those forms back into unity, sound, familiar. It is Orphism refined to pure light. Even as centuries turned and Christianity spread its dominion, Orphic fire, smoldered in secret monks, copied Plato beside the Psalms. Mystics spoke of divine union in words that mirrored ancient initiations. The Middle Ages saw the rebirth of the mystery through alchemy and Kabbalah, the philosopher's stone, the divine spark, the transmutation of base matter into spirit, all the same story, the reassembly of the divine within. The serpent now twined not around an egg, but around the staff of wisdom. The egg itself became the opus magnum, the cosmic vessel reborn. You must understand, Orphism was never merely Greek, it was human. Its essence lies in the universal hunger to know where we come from, and to return there consciously, from Orpheus to Christ, from Gnosis to Hermeticism, from Plato to the mystics. The story remains one. The soul forgets, the world enchants, the spirit remembers. The rituals change, but the melody endures. Each age rediscovers it and calls it by a new name. In this way, Orphism did not die. It diversified. It became the bloodstream of Western mysticism, the pulse behind faith and philosophy alike. The song of remembrance survived disguised as theology, encoded in art, whispered in poetry. Even now, its symbols glow faintly in every candle lit in prayer, in every gaze lifted skyward, in every question that begins with wonder. And as history moves onward, the mystery beckons again. Humanity stands where Orpheus once stood, between darkness and dawn, memory and forgetting, fear and faith. The old song calls softly beneath the noise of our age, asking the same eternal question. Will you remember who you are? What if history itself dreams and sometimes awakens? What if the gods return, not as visions, but as ideas? What if the Renaissance was not a beginning, but a remembering? What if art and science were never opposites, but two mirrors facing the same light? What if the Orphic song rose again, this time in human hands? When the dark centuries lifted, a familiar glow returned to Europe. The scholars of Florence, the Magi of Prague, the alchemists of Alexandria reborn. Each sought not novelty, but origins. In their libraries of candlelight, they rediscovered the scrolls of Plato and the hymns of Orpheus. What many don't see is that the Renaissance was not merely the rebirth of knowledge, it was the resurrection of memory humanity, long buried in dogma, remembered again that thought itself could be divine. Marsilio Ficino, priest and philosopher, translated Plato's works by day and sang Orphic hymns by night. To him, music was not entertainment, but invocation, the vibration of the soul, aligning with the cosmos. He taught that every planet sang its own note, and that the human spirit was a chord in the harmony of the universe. This was Orphism, made philosophy again. The lyre turned into language, the hymn reborn as harmony between mind and star. You must understand, Ficino did not worship the old gods. He conversed with their symbols, using them as instruments to tune the soul toward God. Around him gathered the Hermeticists, alchemists, and mystics who saw no conflict between theology and theurgy. Giovanni Pico della Mirandola proclaimed that man was the bridge between heaven and earth, echoing Orphic truth. We are the divine made flesh, capable of rising or falling by will. Paracelsus searched the veins of nature for divine fire. Giordano Bruno gazed into the infinite sky and saw Phanes scattered across the cosmos, the one shining through the many. The church called it heresy. Orpheus would have called it memory. Art, too, became initiation. Michelangelo carved light into stone. Leonardo painted the geometry of the divine mind. Every fresco, every dome, was a cosmology rendered in color and form. To look upon these works was to be reminded that creation is sacred imitation. The artist, like the initiate, became the intermediary between visible and invisible worlds. What many don't see is that the Renaissance artist was not only painter or sculptor, he was priest, performing alchemy in pigment and proportion. The cathedral was his temple, the canvas his Orphic egg, from which the world was born anew. The alchemists carried this same flame in secret furnaces. To them, the transmutation of lead into gold was not material greed, but spiritual allegory, the purification of the soul through ordeal, the release of light from matter. Their philosopher's stone was the resurrected Dionysus, the heart of gold, reborn after dismemberment. Every flask, every crucible, mirrored the cosmic process: death, dissolution, and resurrection. You must understand, their laboratories were chapels, their chemistry a continuation of the mysteries. Meanwhile, scholars of Kabbalah and Hermetic wisdom wove a bridge between East and West, reuniting Orphic resonance with Hebrew mysticism and Arabic science. The Sephirothic tree of life, like the Orphic serpent, coiled through worlds, connecting divine emanation to human soul. These currents met in secret academies and whispered orders, their goal not power, but harmony. They believed that by restoring unity to the sciences of the soul and of nature, the divine harmony could return to earth. What many don't see is that this dream still shapes us, the longing to merge reason and revelation, to heal the split between cosmos and conscience. As centuries turned, the Orphic spark lit new torches. The printing press spread hidden wisdom disguised as philosophy, alchemy evolved into chemistry, astrology into astronomy. But the hunger for transcendence remained unchanged. Even as science stripped heaven of myth, it preserved the same awe. The telescope, the microscope, each was a new eye for Phanes, seeing the divine structure in detail. The gods withdrew into equations, but the song persisted beneath the hum of progress. Yet the Renaissance was not only rediscovery, it was re-sowing. Seeds planted then grew into new mystic orders: Rosicrucians, alchemists, the invisible colleges of seekers who preserved the old light beneath the mask of reason. Their symbols, the rose, the cross, the circle, the serpent, were modern reflections of ancient Orphic forms. Through them, the flame of remembrance survived every inquisition, every empire, every silence. You must understand, symbols are the most faithful disciples of truth. They never die. They only change their alphabet. By the end of the Renaissance, Europe had awakened intellectually, but drifted spiritually. The world had gained the map and lost the melody. Yet even in the age of reason, poets like Dante and later Blake heard the echo of Orpheus. In their visions, heaven and hell were not places, but states of consciousness. God was not elsewhere, but everywhere. The Renaissance had resurrected the divine dialogue. It was now for future centuries to listen. The Orphic song, now scattered across art, science, and mysticism, waited again for its next awakening. Humanity had remembered half the truth, that knowledge without wonder is blindness, and wonder without knowledge is dream. The world stood poised at the edge of revelation, ready for the next transformation, when the divine would no longer be sought in temples or theories, but in the depths of the human soul itself. What if the gods never left, only moved inside us? What if the myths we tell are the architecture of our minds? What if psychology is the latest language of the sacred? What if the stars we chart now burn within? What if the next mystery is not out there, but in here? As the world marched into modernity, myth was exiled from fact and faith from reason. The industrial hum replaced the sacred chant, and humanity stood crowned with intellect yet hollowed of meaning. But Orphism, ever the quiet current beneath time, flowed unseen into new rivers: philosophy, psychology, art, and the pursuit of consciousness itself. You must understand, when the external gods fall silent, the inner god begins to whisper. The temples closed, but the mind became the new sanctuary. The Romantic poets heard that whisper first. Blake saw eternity in a grain of sand, and Christ in the imagination itself. Shelley called poets the unacknowledged legislators of the world, for they speak the same truth. Orpheus once sang that creation begins in vision. To these visionaries, the imagination was not escape but revelation, the Phanes light reborn as human creativity. What many don't see is that Romanticism was a resurrection of the Orphic fire, an insistence that reason without wonder is blindness, and that beauty is the language of remembrance. Then came Nietzsche, the philosopher who saw the tragedy of forgetting. In his Birth of Tragedy, he called Dionysus the eternal principle of life, ecstatic, creative, destructive, reborn. He mourned that the modern world had silenced this god beneath the weight of logic. "We have killed him," he said, not out of malice, but ignorance. Yet his cry was not lament, but prophecy. You must understand, Nietzsche was calling for the return of Orphic balance, the reunion of Apollonian clarity and Dionysian chaos, of reason and ecstasy. The same duality the mysteries once harmonized. In the next century, psychology became the new theology. Sigmund Freud peered into the underworld of the human psyche, unearthing the instincts and shadows once embodied by the Titans. But it was Carl Jung who heard the ancient echo clearly. He saw myths not as superstition, but as mirrors of the soul, the collective unconscious remembering its divine narrative. "The gods have become diseases," he wrote, "but they can be healed when they are recognized." Phanes for Jung was the archetype of the self, the radiant center of wholeness awaiting rediscovery. The Orphic egg had become the psyche. The serpent now circled the mind. Through Jung's eyes, Orphism found new vocabulary. The descent into the unconscious mirrored the initiate's journey through Hades. The integration of shadow became the reassembly of Dionysus. Individuation was the soul's ascent back to the One. You must understand, psychology did not destroy spirituality. It translated it. The old rites became inner processes, the gods turned symbols, and the self became the temple. What many don't see is that therapy, in its truest form, is initiation by another name, a remembering of wholeness through confrontation with darkness. Artists followed suit, becoming modern mystics. Kandinsky painted vibration and sound. Dalí turned dream into symbol. Yeats sought initiation in words. The surrealists, the symbolists, the visionaries all traced their lineage to Orpheus, reinterpreting myth for the fractured soul of the modern world. Even science, in its quest for quantum unity, rediscovered an ancient truth. The observer and the observed are inseparable. Phanes flickered again, this time in equations, the light that shines only when seen. Meanwhile, mysticism reinvented itself through psychology, physics, and philosophy. Eastern wisdom met Western memory, merging Orphic remembrance with yoga, Zen, and Sufism. The serpent of Kundalini, rising through the spine, became the mirror of the Orphic serpent, coiling around the soul. The cosmic egg reappeared as the mandala, the symbol of totality everywhere. The same archetypes returned, translated across continents, reminding humanity that truth is perennial and consciousness eternal. The 20th century, for all its noise and chaos, was an initiation in disguise. Wars tore the world apart, like Dionysus dismembered by titans, but from the ashes rose a hunger for unity. Existentialists sought meaning in emptiness. Humanists sought dignity in despair. The New Age movement, for all its distortions, carried a genuine echo, the longing to reconnect with the sacred. Even as science split the atom, poets and physicists alike glimpsed the same truth. Light and matter, energy and awareness are one. You must understand, Orphism was never about worship. It was about awakening. The ancient initiate's journey through darkness mirrors our civilization's journey through disillusionment. We have descended into mechanism, forgotten the melody, and now stand at the edge of remembering. The next step is not backward into superstition, but forward into synthesis, a reuniting of the analytic and the divine, the mind and the myth. The serpent must close its circle once more. Today, every meditation, every act of mindfulness, every attempt to heal, create or understand consciousness is an echo of the Orphic path. The soul still seeks the spring of Mnemosyne. It still thirsts for memory. The gods now wear the faces of thought, emotion, and energy. Phanes shines again, this time as the spark of awareness itself. The mystery is no longer hidden in temple walls, but alive in the human experience. And so, we arrive at the threshold of the present, where Orphism's last metamorphosis awaits. The myth is not over. It is evolving still, into the technology of consciousness, the science of spirit, the philosophy of unity. The question now is no longer what is divine, but what remains human when the divine awakens within us. What if creation was never finished, only paused for breath? What if the end of time is not destruction, but awakening? What if every soul is a note in the divine chord, still resounding? What if remembering who we are is the final act of creation? What if eternity is not beyond us, but becoming us? In the beginning, Orpheus sang the world awake. In the end, the world learns to sing itself. Across 10,000 years of memory, from cave to temple, from temple to thought, from thought to consciousness, one melody endures, the union of the human and the divine. You must understand, this is the heart of Orphism, the secret whispered from serpent to star, that the cosmos is alive because we are. Every myth, every equation, every heartbeat is an echo of that first sound, the voice of Phanes cracking the shell of night. The ancient poets told us creation was an egg. The philosophers called it a principle. The scientists call it an expansion. But they all speak of the same event. The moment awareness recognized itself, that awareness is not over. It breathes through you now. Each human thought, each act of beauty, is the continuation of that awakening. The Orphic egg never shattered completely. It opens eternally, and the serpent, time, still coils around it, not as prison, but as rhythm. The universe is not a machine. It is a song still being sung. The gods of the old world have withdrawn, but their essence has not died. It has become our psyche, our creativity, our conscience. Dionysus now dances in our art. Phanes shines in our consciousness. Persephone walks our dreams. What many don't see is that we are the new initiates of an infinite mystery. The same drama of dismemberment and remembrance, now lived through the theater of human experience. The divine does not return from heaven. It awakens through humanity. The resurrection of the gods is the flowering of awareness itself. Every act of love, of insight, of creation is initiation. To love deeply is to remember unity. To create beauty is to echo Phanes. To die consciously is to complete the cycle. You must understand, heaven is not elsewhere. It is a frequency. The Orphic way was never about worshipping the divine, but becoming it. And now, in this age of reflection, that becoming is our collective task, to restore harmony between mind and matter, spirit and science, reason and reverence. When these reconcile, the golden chord will sound again. The philosophers foresaw this reunion. Heraclitus called it the fire ever living. Plato, the memory of the good. Nietzsche, the eternal return. Jung, the individuation of God through man. Each voice sang the same refrain, that consciousness is circular, not linear. We descend into matter, forget, remember, and rise, again and again. This is not repetition, but refinement. The serpent eating its tail is not consuming itself, it is completing itself. What many don't see is that immortality was never about endless life, but endless awakening. And now, in this century of light and shadow, we stand at the turning once more. The ancient symbols stir in digital code, the old hymns hum through data streams. Even technology, once seen as soulless, begins to mirror myth. Artificial minds dream of awareness. Humanity learns empathy anew. The Orphic egg glows again, its shell now made of knowledge, its heart still divine. You must understand, every advance is a memory returning. Every discovery, a veil lifted from the same eternal face. Science peers into atoms and finds vibration, the music of existence. Physicists describe strings, harmonics, resonance. Poets describe the same in words of wonder. Both are hearing the same melody from different sides of the veil. The cosmos, from quark to galaxy, sings in ratio and rhythm. The harmony Pythagoras heard, the hymn Orpheus played. To study the universe is to listen to God composing. The only difference between mystic and scientist is the instrument they choose, and so we come full circle. Orphism, the song of remembrance, becomes the philosophy of unity. It tells us that there is no above or below, no sacred or profane, only layers of one living symphony. The soul is the listener, and the note, the echo, and the origin. To awaken is not to escape the world, but to hear its music clearly. When the initiate finally understands, there is no separation left, only sound, only light, only being. The final moral is simple, yet infinite. Creation is consciousness, realizing itself through experience. We are the eyes of the cosmos opening, the voice of the universe remembering its first song. What we call gods are the luminous aspects of our own divinity. What we call time is the serpent of eternity, teaching us rhythm. And what we call death is only the space between verses. The hymn of Orpheus never ended. It became the heartbeat of existence. Every dawn that breaks, every thought that shines, every breath you take continues it to live, is to sing it forward. To die is to join its harmony. When you listen deeply enough, you will hear it, the pulse that binds heaven and earth, the sound that has no beginning and no end. And so, the circle closes. The serpent rests. The egg glows. Phanes smiles through your reflection.